My opponent has no experience in city government and therefore hasn't yet understood that a mayor can't come along and simply freeze everybody's salary. I already have frozen for the last 3 years the salaries of those employees who are not represented by a union. That includes me and all my executive staff. All the other employees, and we have approximately 2,100, are represented by unions, and they have binding union contracts. To violate those contracts opens the city up for damages that could cost more than the salaries of the employees. I have been a very careful steward of the public's money, and I have been very serious with the city's unions. You can see the results in the accomplishment of frozen compensation for the last 2 years in our largest bargaining units at the city by sitting down with those unions, addressing the reality of our recession, addressing the reality of our budget constraints at the city with the unions, rather than imposing on them something that would be a contract violation. I've gone to the unions and said, we have to work on this. We must work on it because the option would be people losing their jobs in large numbers, and the consequence of that would be our citizens losing services that our community relies on.
I think we do need to sit down with the union leadership, and especially, of course, there's the public safety unions and then the non-public safety unions. But, to sit down and say times are different. And we need to change this trajectory where our expenses are over our revenues. And so what would I do different? I'd make sure that I'm holding the line, explaining it, and this is what we can afford, and making sure, and, we talked about concessions. Well, when you look at some of those concessions, actually one of the city employees, I knocked on his door just this last Saturday. It was the largest one, Local 270. They gave up a percentage of their pay raise, but they put in an extra step, a step 5, which ultimately for the city was a very negligible amount between the 5% and adding a step 5, because 80% of those employees are step 4, so they all could move to step 5. He was on the lower end, and he said, so it did me no good, but the overall financial impact to the city was negligible, and so we need to, when you talk about concessions, we need to talk about long-term strategy for our financial health. Not 1 year to the next year to the next year, because it gets very frustrating for the employees at City Hall of going from a year-to-year budget knowing that we still have not addressed that structural gap. And predominantly that structural gap has to deal with salaries and benefits. And when you look at the benefit structure for the city and who pays copay or not even copay, premiums, the premium share is not there like it is in the private sector, and we need to address that. And it's not going to happen overnight, but we aren't even addressing it.